One of the least wise things to do these days is to turn on the television and watch the mainstream media, particularly news and documentaries, because you never really know quite whether everything is genuine anymore, or whether a certain message is being pushed towards us. However, the other side of the coin is if you sit at a computer and you start to surf the internet, you're in a similar situation, but instead of perhaps the message coming from 5 or 6 big organisations pushing their message to you, you've got a plethora of individuals putting up their points of view similar to this, me. And that can be a bit of a worry. We all then have to start using our brain to try and work out, well, what is plausible, what is true and what isn't. And it's interesting when you compare the two, that one side seems to give one story, and on the whole, I would say, and I may be wrong, of course, because I don't look at the whole of the internet, who's ever got the time and space or even the desire to do that, that there are obviously different stories, but some more extreme than others, some less plausible than others. However, when things are almost spoken of as being in plain sight, and things are actually put out there, and on one side will be saying, no, it's not happening at all, and yet you go online and you go, well, hold on a minute, there is these things called Agenda 21, for example, or Agenda 30, or even something mysterious and unusual called a tri-state city that's being planned for the Netherlands. And it's there in plain sight. And we hear of the World Economic Forum being behind a number of these things, and they're not denying that it's true. I think that sometimes you get the mainstream media saying that none of this is true, and yet it's actually downloadable from the original source, which is confusing in its own way. Why would they pretend that it isn't and everything's okay? So, for example, one of the worrying things at the moment is this whole concept of farmers in the Netherlands. And I understand that there's 11,200 farms in the Netherlands. And the plan is basically, on the excuse of nitrates, to close over the next X many years 11,200 farms in the Netherlands because of this, that and the other excuse, so that a tri-state city, a smart city, can be built. And the idea being a bit like, I suppose, if you go back in history when people used to live on the land and live in a rural environment mostly, and then as the Industrial Revolution came, they moved into the cities and towns. Not all of them, but most of them. And now we have a smaller population in the rural area, and all the farming is done basically by computer and machinery, and a few people operating it. And you've got this high intensity of people all jostling shoulders together. And I believe the idea with the smart tri-state cities, these smart cities, is to try and get more people off the land and have them in more concentrated area. Quite why you would want to do that, I'm not really sure, unless you were, I don't know, trying to keep a control of people, know where they're going, understand how much they're spending with their money, how much CO2, for example, are they putting into the atmosphere. Not that that actually makes a blind bit of difference in the great reality of things, but it seems that having some sort of control in a smart environment, so that you can, I don't know, control perhaps the water or the food that they eat, and control pretty much everything about them if you keep them in a concentrated area. That to me sounds quite frightening, and the fact that the literature is online, and as I say, it's all hiding in plain sight, is even more frightening. That as a result of that, the mainstream media aren't actually telling us about it, They're not letting us know that I think it's something like 179 nations have agreed to this concept, although the population haven't been asked. I mean, how does a nation agree to anything like this if the nation hasn't actually been asked? It may be a spokesman from the nation, may have signed a bit of paper, but if the population at whole has said, how do you fancy about all coming off the land, out of the villages and living in one great big city? Does that sound desirable? No. Anything with the word smart in the front of it sounds a bit dodgy to me. I'm not talking about smart cars, you know, those little smart cars. That's, I think, is a complete separate thing. I'm talking about like smart meters or smart motorways, in which the computers and the digital technology is supposed to really help and take away autonomy from us. I have no problem reading my meter and filling in the form or ringing them up or putting it online what my electricity consumption is. I like the fact that I can do that. I'm using it, I will report back. Or if there was a gas meter reader knocking on my door, I have the autonomy to open the door and say, actually, you can come in today, not whenever you like. I've never really been happy with direct debit payments like that, and where possible I avoid them, because I want to be able to be in the position to say, okay, how much do I owe? Right, well, I'll pay you on Friday because I know I've got a cheque coming in on Thursday, rather than you just dipping into my account whenever you fancy it and taking whatever you think that you want to take. So I've always tried to avoid all of that. To me, small rather than bigger, autonomy rather than smart is the answer. I'm absolutely appalled that the poor as in put on, Netherland farmers are having this pressure that they're being told that they can no longer use nitrates. That's a reason to close their farm and all of that. Now, I understand that nitrates can be a problem because they can wash into the water table and things like that. And I'm not keen on large scale industrial farming, for one thing. I think instead of all this what would you call it? This large operational push people into big areas and bring in some form of global currency so that everybody has this, that there's I don't know, some central government for the whole planet. I think this is totally wrong, extremely scary, and won't work. And the idea that humans and technology will evolve to become some sort of goodness knows what is nonsense. For me, if I had any influence or any power or anything, I would be arguing for small. Go back to smaller farms, producing local food for smaller communities in which the people themselves have autonomy, and that the people can decide through their basic and old-fashioned voting systems, analog voting systems preferably, of what they want in their community, in their part of the world. I cannot see how anybody sitting on one side of the globe could have any knowledge of what is best for another community on another side of the world, and certainly not one vast community interconnected with devices, either physical or in their heads or in their bodies with chips and things. This, to me, is absolute nonsense. I don't think it would work, and I think many people will fight against it, and I hope they do. It's madness. Anything with the word smart in it is in fact the opposite. We know that smart motorways have killed people and it doesn't work. And basically, as governments try to implement large-scale things, we've seen how incompetent they are and how they fail. So how anything like this could possibly work, I do not know. But it's not advisable anyway. For me, go back to small scale, not tiny, but small scale groups, individuals and smaller communities. And then you've got cohesion, you've got a sense of purpose, you've got people interacting with people, and you've got a way of life which I think is far more desirable than taking huge portions of the population and shoving them behind walls in effectively what I would call some form of prison.